guys, it's Rock Warrior 97, and of course, as you can tell, I'm back. You know, Eric Bischoff is probably not one of my favorite people in real life, but damn, his theme song kicked ass. Definitely one of my top 5 favorite theme songs. Well, today I'm going to give you my top 5 most underrated albums of all time, and plus, as an added bonus, I'm going to give you my thoughts on Judgment Day 2009 with predictions. For my top 5 most underrated albums, I picked them on pretty much their opinion based, but the way I view them as underrated is by either critical reception or sales reception, or probably both. So let's get this show on the road anyway. Okay, coming in at number 5 for my top 5 most underrated albums of all time goes to Bridge by Blues Traveler. Blues Traveler was a band that was big in the mid to late 90s thanks to the hit single called Runaround. That was off their 4th album, appropriately titled 4, which came out in 1994. After living off the album's success for a few years, in 1997 they released Straight On Till Morning, which received a mixed reception from critics and fans. Eventually, after the tour for that album ended, they took a much-needed break because the lead singer, John Popper, was going through a lot of weight issues because he was so immensely overweight. And by the time he had finally lost enough weight to start recording with the band, their bassist, Bobby Sheehan, died of a drug overdose. So they had to find a replacement for him, which turned out to be the group's lead guitarist's brother, Tad. And after that, they also recruited a keyboardist, a guy by the name of Ben Wilson, and they continued on. In 2001, they released what would be their final album from the major label A&M Records, entitled Bridge. While the previous album, Straight Out Till Morning, appealed to their cult fan base with a lot of more jammy type songs, shall we say, this album went a little bit more in the pop vein, as it had songs like Back in the Day, Girl Inside My Head, Just For Me, and yeah. It is a really good album. They really demonstrate how they could write really good poppy type songs. I mean, they all have like really catchy hooks and could pretty much get stuck in your head. And the album also has a song called Pretty Angry, which is dedicated to Bobby Sheehan, who, as I said earlier, overdosed about 2 or 3 years before the album came out. Pretty Angry is probably some of the best lyrics I've ever heard in a ballad of all time, and that is saying a lot. It's sad, but really well written. Also, the very last song, called Decision of the Skies, was supposed to be for an album they were doing with their original bassist, Bobby Sheehan. But as I said before, he overdosed, so the album was left unfinished and eventually released as a mini-album on their website. This song, Decision of the Skies, they said was supposed to be off the record, but they never recorded it with him. It is eventually used off this record. Overall, for some reason, this album did not get that much attention, and about a year later, the band was fired from the record label, and ever since then, they've been on small independent labels and haven't had really much success. Overall, if you like a little bit of blues, rock / pop, I recommend you check this one out. However, if you've never heard a song by Blues Traveler or something, I strongly recommend you get the album 4 first before you get this. Coming in at number 4 in my top 5 most underrated albums of all time goes to Apollo 18 by They Might Be Giants. Hands down, one of my favorite albums of all time. In the summer of 2007, this is the only album I ever played, period. A lot of They Might Be Giants fans say that this is kind of like their version of the White Album, as it has about a total of 38 different songs, although 21 of those 38 songs are really part of one larger song called Fingertips. The overall album is actually pretty dark, while the They Might Be Giants is pretty much known for doing children's albums nowadays. This album was pretty dark and adult-themed if you can read between the lines. For example, the song I Palindrome I, which sounds like a pretty good little catchy tune, if you read between the lines, it's actually the dark story of a guy who kills his mother to earn her fortune or whatever, and then later on his kids kill him to get his fortune, which he took from his mother in the first place. There's another song called My Evil Twin, which is like the group's tribute to Stevie Wonder. There's a song called Narrow Your Eyes, which is like their tribute to Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons and the Beatles. There's a song called Hall of Heads, which is pretty freaking creepy. There's a song called See the Constellation, which is like their tribute to post-punk bands and stuff. There's Turn Around, which is like their version of a 40s or 50s swing. There's just so much on this album. It's so catchy, really good. But if you're new to They Might Be Giants, I recommend you get a Greatest Hits package or the album they did right before this called Flood. While critics received it really well, it was really well received by critics and fans. It didn't sell very well. Overall, They Might Be Giants have only sold like 1 million albums in the US. In my opinion, they are a severely underrated band. Also, if you think they sound familiar, that's maybe because you've watched Malcolm in the Middle, because They Might Be Giants did the theme song for Malcolm in the Middle. Up next for number 3 on the list, we have an album from the 80s. As a matter of fact, this is the only album to have any sales certification by the RIAA. The album is called Creatures of Night, and it's by a little band called Kiss. First off, let's get into the right time frame here. The early 80s was not a good time for Kiss. While they dominated the charts in the mid to late 70s, the early 80s is when they were a little unfocused, as critics always hated their brand of hard rock and stuff, saying that, oh, it's stupid, or, whatever. So around the late 70s, they started branching out, starting with a song called I Was Made for Lovin' You. I mean, that song, the music's okay, but that song was blah. Then they did the 1980 album Unmasked, which was their attempt at pop, but it also ultimately failed. It also saw the departure of original drummer Peter Criss, who quit right after the album was made. So a year later, they promised to make a real heavy album. What instead they got was Music from the Elder, a progressive rock album. A progressive rock album coming from Kiss. I've actually heard this album in its entirety, and it's actually not that bad, but it's really like, what the hell were they thinking when they made this? So anyway, after that album was a huge bomb, they finally decided to make the Rough and Heavy album, and this was the result. Ace Frehley, while he's pictured on the album cover and is credited with lead guitar duties off the record, he did not do a single thing with it, as he was so frustrated by Music from the Elder's poor performance and that he didn't really get to play that much on the record, that he pretty much quit the band before the album came out. They just didn't want to let fans know because they would probably lose their record contract if they said Ace Frehley quit. But nevertheless, he is credited here. Who actually played guitar on the record would be his future replacement, a guy by the name of Vinnie Vincent, who in my opinion is an extremely underrated songwriter. He co-wrote about 3 songs off the record, but the album's MVP would be the drummer Eric Carr. I said earlier in my top 5 best drummers of all time that he sadly passed away in 1991 of cancer. If you want to know why I put Eric Carr on my list, buy this album or listen to a few songs. Listen to how freaking loud the drums sound in every song. Every song. Just listen to it. And the lyrics are actually pretty good. Usually Kiss songs sound like really stupid or something, especially when they're about love. I mean, Love Gun? What the hell? But this album only has one ballad called I Still Love You, and it's pretty darn heavy and dark. Overall, if you're new to Kiss, I recommend it. If you're a longtime fan, I still recommend it. The album still didn't sell very well, though this wasn't because that the critics hated it. They actually gave it a positive reception, and so did fans that buy it. Why did this album tank so bad? One reason. They still had their makeup on. Fans were sick of it, and they wanted to see what they looked like without it. And they did take off the makeup for their next album, called Lick It Up. Vinnie Vincent was eventually given lead guitar credits about 15 years later. Overall, I recommend you should have this. I think you should have this album in your collection, especially if you're a Kiss fan. You can get it off iTunes, pretty damn cheap. It's only like $9, and it's starting to become hard to find. So that's why I said use iTunes, man.